and full of interesting experiences. This evening we have a very second to last presentation by Dr. Akanksha. Dr. Akanksha is a research scholar at Leipzig University in the Department of Political Science. She did her PhD in sociology in the fall of 2024, correctly. So just about a year and a couple of months ago. And she will give a presentation on one of the subjects of her PhD thesis on the paradox of populist leadership. She's done some extraordinarily interesting research on populist leadership in environmental movements in India. I've heard a presentation of this before, and I think it was one of the most interesting presentations I've heard. Now she's doing us the favor of applying our theoretical research paradigm, which is the problem of representation, to her particular subject matter, which is populism and leadership in the civil society. So I'm very glad you're with us this evening. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, as I hope we are all. And I'm going to hand you over this is on. It is filming. You can just leave it, so I don't need to do anything. Oh yeah, and you have to.
Yeah. No, I think you have to use this one because we've adjusted everything, but this works. You have this little thing here.
Yeah, like okay. So I'm now going to hand over the microphone to Dr. Akanksha, and wish us all an interesting evening. Here you go.
Hello, everyone. So thank you for the introduction, Professor Pates, and thank you for having me here to present my lecture or the presentation, whatever you say. Thank you, Professor Pates, for giving me this opportunity to present my views. So first of all, as you have seen the title of my presentation, The Paradoxes of Populist Leadership, Problem of Representation in India's Environmental Movement. So in introduction, I would like to, firstly, I will start with the environment movement, particularly within the Indian context. So I'm raising few questions talking about that how environmental movement in India, they are particularly considered as a grassroots, anti-elite and participatory, but at the same time, they reproduces hierarchical, charismatic and exclusionary form of the leadership that undermine democratic representation and also participation. My another assumption is that populism, I'm looking up at the populism beyond elections, because I'm not here talking about any political parties and political leaders, but I'm talking about that how populism function beyond elections and how democracy beyond participation performs. So there are two paradoxes that I assume that I draw. So first of all, I talk about that how populism promises voices and representation, but at the same time, leadership practices often produces silencing, simplification, and elite captures. Framing these paradoxes more clear, I'm raising a question. Do environmental movements mean purely democratic spaces? Do they provide us the democratic spaces or not? Because we assume that they are participatory in nature and they're naturally representative. But what is the empirical reality of it? Because I went to the field and I have observed how environment movement basically function. There's a leadership concentration. There are NGOization, because through movement, there are emergence of NGOs, and sometimes there are NGOs exist first, and then there is emergence of movements, social movements. So vice versa, this work like this. And in the third part is media-facing spokesperson, that how leaders, environment movement leaders emerge as a spokespersons. And fourth thing is that there is a legal and expert dominance. And then if I particularly talk about that, how environment movement within India, what are their typologies? So they majorly focuses on the four things. There are movements which focuses on anti-displacement, which is Narmada Bachao Andolan, which on which I have worked upon in my PhD, that is NBA, Save Narmada movement. Second is the focuses on forest rights and indigenous movements, for example, indigenous rights. Third, they talk about anti-mining movements, and fourth, they talk about the urban environmentalism, talk about against the pollution, which is very recent one. So I'm particularly because talking about say Narmada movements, Narmada Bachao Andolan. So this is, if I talk about its context and little bit of its history, it's 38 or 39 years old movement in the state of Madhya Pradesh, and which is in the central India, and which is still going on, and it has been very successful movement led by leader Medha Patkar. And the features of this, that it is a grassroots environment movement. It is against the development projects, that is dams, and all sort of development projects. It is anti-displacement, and it is pro-people movement, which means that there is a moral commitment to act for the interest and for the welfare of the people. So for me, NBA, I'm taking this as an important case, and also it is also as important, analytical, powerful, because it focuses on the tensions, which internal tensions, which and not merely on the state failures. To situate my questions more clearly, I talk about that how this movement, there is a internal tension, and that's why I'm raising a question that whether this movement was democratic or not, and how I can situate this movement with the populist lens. So I'm focusing on the three things here. First of all, like I'm seeing it with the populist political logic of Laclau's theory, and second, I'm talking about that how there is a mass mobilization within this movement, the articulation of the logic. And third, I'm talking about how it constrained the democratic representation and participation. So for conceptual foundation, I focused on Laclau's idea of that how populism emerged as a political logic and not an ideology. So he says that from multiple heterogeneous grievances, populism produces unity, which means the homogeneity. And second, he talks about the logic of articulation. Populism is a logic of articulation, where he talks about that how diverse communities come together under this common cause of environmentalism. And third, I talk about that how they construct this common enemy, common enemy of common enemy for the people, like it can be anything like state or the elite or the system. Now, if I see NBA through this lens, NBA has also articulated these 5 points. If you can see that they talk about the displacement due to dams and the development projects. They talk about the loss of livelihood. They talk about ecological destruction. They talk about Adivasis' identity, means indigenous identity, and they also talk against the state or technocratic development. So if you can see, these 5 things are not interrelated with each other, but still the environment movement consider all of these things together. And now if I talk about that how NBA is a populist movement, so first of all, I would like to talk about that. Now I talked about like how they have constructed, leaders have constructed this us versus them categories, and like the people against the elites or the state, or the corporate or any kind of a corporation, which are not focusing on the interest and the welfare of the people. Second, this is an NGO, means non-governmental organization, but it also carries certain ideologies, which is leftist or the Marxist ideology in certain sense, but also claim themselves as a pro-environmentalist group or the organization. Third, this movement should be based on the environment issue, but it does not happen. it focuses on the broader issues. For example, it focuses on the women's issues, lies in the livelihood of the people, like economic aspects, along with the environmental aspects that I have also seen in another movements. In Germany, like Fridays for Future, and in UK, there is a rebellious extinction. They have also followed this same type of pattern because they have also addressed the issues like patriarchy dominant, there is a heterosexism and militarism, along with the climate issues. My fourth point is that it also adopted comprehensive ideologies. For example, like in India, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but I'll just give a bit of explanation of all of these ideologues. So this movement has adopted all of these ideologues, and we can also say that how they have co-opted and appropriated. So from Ambedkar, who wrote a constitution and as well as who was a supporter of radical democracy, and he himself was a Dalit. So they appropriated Ambedkar's ideas. They also appropriated Gandhi's idea, who was a father of the nation, considered important, a prominent personality in India's independence movement. From Subhash Chandra Bose and Bhagat Singh, who was also a freedom fighter in a way. Birsa Munda and Tantia Mama were indigenous. They were a tribe from the tribal communities, and their followers are from the tribal communities. And Birsa Munda, like he got died at a very early age, at the age of 25, because he fought for the forest right of the indigenous communities. So that's how like they have used this discursive strategies, and not only this, they have also utilized or employed the methods of Gandhi, which he has used in the independence movement, like for the mass mobilization, for example, hunger strike, the different demonstrations, and they half submerged into the water, and which is called as a satyagraha and jal satyagraha, all sort of civil disobedience, all sort of these strategies were employed by Gandhi during the independence struggle. So I have witnessed that how this movement has also appropriated these strategies and acts, and Gandhian slogans were also used within this movement. They have also recontextualized, as I mentioned, like they have also recontextualized India's independence struggle and compare this movement with the India's independence struggle movement. In a way, because they promoted the idea of Gandhi's, like how he fought with the capitalism and imperialism. And last but not the least, the NBA leader was also considered as a female Gandhi. When I have interviewed few people, the common masses, they said that she's a female Gandhi for us because she has appropriated his methods. Not only this, she has also appropriated some religious ideologies or religious strategies, irrespective of this, that she was herself talk about herself that she belongs or aligned with this leftist or Marxist ideologies, but still she has adopted some religious strategies, as you can see within this photo, like how there is a symbolic representation. In the first one, like I can just give a brief idea of this. Like the last one where there is a picture of a woman, there is a picture of a goddess, which is sort of destructive in nature. So before that, I think I should give about the religious significance, like how religious this river on which the dams and development projects were assigned by the government and planned. It has very religious significance for the common people because in Madhya Pradesh, people believe that they circumambulate around the river. This is 1,300-kilometer river around which they circulate, take a circle, and apart from this, they have a belief while seeing this river, they will wash their sins away. So this is the belief among the people, and so that the political leaders also do populist act around it. They also perform such acts like they circumambulate around the river to mobilize the people and to impress them basically. So that's why Medha Patkar, she has also utilized the symbolic image and uses the symbolic image, like made this goddesses, which is called as a Kali, and she should not, the Narmada should be quiet in nature and she should not be destructive. That's why she's showing this picture or making these images by making people, to make people aware that you should not destruct our rivers, and our, because our rivers or our natural resources are directly related with our religion, that is Hinduism, and it has a close relationship with the religion and environment, how we treat our natural resources. And then they also talk about that, about the women, that they should come together through this image, Hugladi Madani, at the like here. Yeah. So they have mobilized the women through this, that how they should fight against those development projects, and they should come together, because women are not supposed to come in the public spaces, especially for the protest. And this is how that they have also mobilized the women by using women rhetorics as well, giving the narratives, historical narratives, and they have also utilized the national rhetoric, where they talk about that how this movement is again a sort of nationalist, with the nationalist rhetoric, and this is another sort of freedom movement. So you can save our nation through saving the river. So this sort of rhetorics. And in the last one, she talks about, like through this picture, she talks about that how we can save our jungles or the forest from the corporates and from the capitalists. So this is how, like, she has provided these pictures, and she has also performed some prayers in her organization, in her office. There was a routine also where she used to perform with the common people, not only to gain their trust, but also to involve with them on the everyday life, on the everyday basis. As a result of it, when people got compensation, she was considered as a Ma Narmada, means a living entity, or maybe the living person in the form of Narmada River. So I entered into one house of a social activist. So in his house, I have seen there is a huge photo of her, a huge this painting of her, where there is like inside it was written that this is Narmada Bachao Andolan NBA, and she's coming out of the river as a symbol that she's a living Ma Narmada. Now, if I talk about that, how leadership as a condition of visibility. So here I'm talking about that how environment movement often claims to be horizontal, participatory, leaderless, and it starts from the below, like from the communities like Dalits, indigenous, and the poor people, to resist against those capitalists and the corporates. But NBA emphasizes collective struggles, yet empirically, the NBA was unthinkable without centralized leadership. And to understand this leadership, this concept of leadership, I employed Max Weber's concept of charismatic authority, where he talks about that charismatic authority is not derived from rules and the regulation, because he talks about three types of the authority: charismatic authority, rational legal authority, and he also talks about emotional and affectional authority. So from that, like I thought that the charismatic authority is appropriate here to understand leadership, and specifically populist leadership. So because there are three things which I have focused on from moral perspective, that she has majorly focuses on the moral conviction, and she has focuses on her sacrifices in personal and the professional life, and also the personal credibility. So this is how Patkar authority was charismatic, because she sat for hunger strike. She got arrested by the police, and she has rejected those institutional powers, systems, and personal identification with suffering. Like how in her personal life she has sacrificed not only her personal life but also her education, because she was MPhil from TIS in India, but she has left her education and contributed for the social movement. for the people. As a result of it, this local suffering contributed that she got this national and the global recognition or visibility, stabilize the movement with the moral narratives, because this movement is considered to be the moral rather than the based on the rules and the regulations. And her leadership made the NBA visible, but this visibility has majorly focused on just singular voice, and that is of her. Now I'll be talking about the representation as claim making. So I'm here talking about two scholars, Hannah Pitkin, who famously distinguished between descriptive representation and substantive representation, and Michael Sward, who talks about that how representation can be performed but not given. So in NBA, this leadership clearly did not descriptively represent it because Medha Patkar was not belong from any displaced community, and she was not an Adivasi, not even Dalit. She was not displaced, and also she did not face any of these struggles. That's why it's not considered to be substantive. Um, Sorry, descriptive. And in substantive, it can be substantive because she act one that she's interested to talk about the welfare of the people and those who got displaced, and yeah, for the interest of the people, for the common masses. Apart from this, NBA leadership made claims in multiple arenas. For example, she got visibility in the Supreme Courts, in all the judiciary system, because she was the one who represented the people's will by herself, raises their voice, means she became the voice of the people. And she was the one who represented the voice of the people at the World Bank inspection panel. And I have seen a few letters she has written to the World Bank by requesting them to not to loan Indian government to construct these dams and the development projects. And then later on, the World Bank has refused to provide loans to Indian government. Third is the national media. Like for national media, like she was the one who's the face of the media. And at international, like she also worked as an international activist because she has attended several conferences, and she has been part of several projects who worked on environmental issues. But the asymmetry is this here, that audiences that validate representation were elites and are not displaced themselves. Yeah. So villagers, like the common people who are indigenous or the common masses, belong from the diverse communities. They rarely have the capacity to reject the leadership claims, and they cannot contest the decision, the strategic claims, and also they did not have the knowledge of the legal and any sort of scientific knowledge. So that's why I consider this representation in the NBA is performed, but not really well, really well taken. And if I talk about, yeah. So further, I'm talking about the translation expertise and epistemic authority, uh, where I've seen like NBA had to, yeah, and we had to translate lived suffering into that they have focused on the legal categories because they talk about the rehabilitation, compensation, and as well as like in the form of that the people who got displaced can get land for land or maybe money or any sort of rehabilitation or compensation. A second, she also talk about the environmental sciences like impact assessment, talk about that how development projects can make impact on the communities or maybe on the villages which were not in the list of affected villages. And she also talked about the development economies. So this is how like she talked about that what can be done and how to work with the system to solve the issues of the common people or the common masses. And that's why like I can say that this translation process was not neutral because the courts, reports, and international advocacy was handled by few people. And specifically, if I talk about Medha Patkar, because she was the only one who used to speak in English and navigate the system and have legal knowledge. Not only this, she also had the local knowledge, and because she was interacting with the people, and I was amazed at how she's good at interacting with the local communities and understanding their concerns and the languages more specifically. So it did not disappear completely, but it was filtered, reframed, and selectively amplified. And I think that she is behaved as an epistemic gatekeeper, because she has the capacity to translate or to take this epistemic populism. This was combined with the technocratic mediation. However, the movement opposed the technocratic rhetorics, but at the same time, they were dependent, like this movement was dependent upon this technocratic or this system because they wanted this recognition from the state or from the nation at the same time. And that's why it has created the internal hierarchy in terms of like between those who experienced displacement and those who narrated the displacement. And when populist leadership strengthens movements, it brings up the moral unity, clarity, mobilization, and counter hegemonic narratives. So further, this is, I think, the most interesting part where I'm talking about how there is a democratic limit, democratic limits, and there is internal silence within the movement. So first of all, there is a hierarchical representation of the leadership, because there are other leaders also within the movements that have never been recognized. There are local leaders as well who were involved in the same manner, but they have never been recognized from the different communities, like from indigenous or the Dalit community. They sat for hunger strike. They were also arrested, but they have never been represented as such. Apart from this, within the movement, there are other urban activists, environmental activists who were involved. But when I met all of them, none of them have spoken about each other, and they have represented themselves that we are the only savior of these common people. So that's how there is a hierarchy. It's not horizontal. This was a gendered leadership within this movement because she was herself a female. So it was a good part that women got representation, but not at that extent. Third point is that the question of caste was missing from this movement. So according to Mukul Sharma, his work says that the environment is a casteist because they are very basic definition of, like in Indian environmentalism, the environment is defined by a very with the ecological imaginary, and it has not questioned the caste dimension. It has not questioned on the pollution, waste, and hazardous labors. And Mukul Sharma considered manual scavenging is also an important issue within the environmentalism. And what this NBA has focused on, they have focused on displacement issue. They're focused on the rivers. They're focused on the conservation and preservation sort of stuff, but they have not questioned on that how the body of the Dalit person can also be polluted. So he questioned that Dalit ecology suffering absorbed into this displacement, into this general notion of displacement. And not only this, he questions, like, you considered river as a sacred and it should not be polluted, and what about those bodies who always exposes to this, like manholes or hazardous tasks they perform, how their body absorb all those pollutants. And these are, like, he talking about a particular community from the caste perspective, they are Dalits. So how, like, they are the one who expose their body more to this dangerous environment, breathe the toxic airs, and live in the areas which are secluded in the nature and which are not very safe. So who will talk about those issues from the caste perspective? And apart from this, like you have constructed this homogenizing discourse where people from the diverse communities come together, and this is a hegemonic construction of the environmentalism, and where the dissent is lost because there is no participation or the representation to those people who can speak for themselves, and and that's why there is a loss of diverse worldviews and the values, and as well as of the subjectivity and agencies. Apart from this, within this movement, there is an indigeneity, like dignity of the people of the indigenous communities. They're considered to be the backward because they don't majorly focuses on the development thing, and they don't accept majorly the idea of development, and that's why they are considered to be backward and not civilized as well. So for inclusion or any kind of representation, first of all, we need to accept them as it is without questioning their identity and without questioning their dignity. So yeah, this was the lack within the movement. Apart from this, there are urban activists who focuses on the rural population and who addresses the question of this rural population. By themselves, they have never addressed, like they have never faced those things. And yeah, there is a internal dissent was often framed as a weakening the movement. So that's why the support was taken for granted, and it was sometimes forced because it was very morally constructed that you'll have to support a leader who is standing for us, who is supporting us, and who has left everything or her personal life for us. So this was a moral construction, which is again a force on the people. So if I see this in a broader context, these populist tendency that I've found, first of all, that politics becomes moralized. Second, disagreements become betrayal within the movement. You cannot disagree with the decision making, and then you cannot also dissent. So that's why, like, it was very moralized. Third, complexity becomes delusion, that you cannot talk about your subjectivity and agency, otherwise it will weaken the movement. So you'll have to come together under this common cause and constructing just one discourse of environmentalism or displacement. So in last one, like in rethinking representation, I was just trying to understand how we can think about the representation. So yeah, like the circulation of elites, we can think about that. We can also rotate leadership within a movement. We can think about that. Second, I'm also very much impressed with the idea of Nancy Fraser, where she talks about 3 dimension, like redistribution, recognition, and representation. So in redistribution, of course, we need to talk about that how our resources need to get distributed, so that there will be compensation like rehabilitation and land to land for the people who lost their homes and their lands and their villages, and recognition like in terms of like we need to accept them as it is, and we need to respect their dignity, and we need to think about the environmental justice, not to promote the environmental violence. And I'm also and in representation sense, like we need to think about that how we can include their voices and the diverse worldviews, and of course agencies. And in third one, claim-based accountability by Swart, like Michael Swart talks about claim-based accountability, where leaders should take the accountability of the people, because in the movement, it has not happened that the movement was by the people or for the people, but it was just one-sided, where the leaders were taking all the decisions and the silencing others. And there is also movement internal democracy as a process. Like we should consider movement as a, like there should be it should be a process of democracy. It should not be an outcome. So like throughout the movement, we should think about that how we can be democratic in nature. The problem is not the populist leadership, in my opinion, but unaccountable representation under the condition of inequality. Because we have structural inequality in India, and that's why we cannot think about the environmental issues in homogenized way. We'll have to think about the different identities and uh, different identities and the voices, like what actually the problem people face in different manner. So in conclusion, I have I would like to talk about that this movement. I'm not saying I just try to diagnose this movement. I'm not in the favor of the movement, or I'm not also criticizing it, but I'm just trying to understand how democratic it was indispensable, and also how democratically it was incomplete. So yeah, in three points, I would like to talk about that, how democratically it was indispensable, because it addresses the question of displacement. It politicized the question of displacement. It also talks about the moralized development. It has also include gender in certain sense. The caste line was little bit blurred because people from different communities come together for the first time, as she claimed, that people come together, used to visit each other's home for the meetings, and used to go for the protest all together, shared their food. So yeah, a little bit of the caste line was blurred in this movement through this, and they have also challenged the state and also the corporates in a certain way. So that's why, like, I consider this movement as democratically indispensable, but at the same time, it was incomplete because it has not addressed. Because the representation was centralized, and it has not addressed the will of all of the people, but will of the few people. And second, the voice was mediated, means Medha Patkar was the mediator in between, and she has translated. She has behaved as an expertise of knowledge of what to be done. She has taken all of the decisions, and that's why I would consider it as the voices of the different masses should be considered. Third, like in internal democracy was constrained by populist logic. Yeah. Thank you.